A bipartisan group of state House lawmakers has introduced legislation to update Michigan's tobacco laws. Now, those bills would shift the focus from punishing kids to holding sellers accountable. Right now, it's a misdemeanor for minors to try to buy nicotine products. That crime would be eliminated. Instead, the bills create new civil penalties for stores and even individual employees who knowingly or negligently sell to minors. Stores would even have to change their signs warning children not to buy tobacco to instead warn clerks not to sell tobacco to minors.